I don't know if you noticed, but this year was quite politically charged. And I don't think it's going to change over this next year either. So here's my top 10 books that I've read in 2021. And this first one has a lot to do with politics. A lot to do with people is probably a better way to put it. Scott Sauls is one of my favorite authors, and he was an associate pastor for Tim Keller for many years, which gives me that gives him props, okay? And so this book is called Jesus Outside the Lines, a way forward for those who are tired of taking sides. And I love Jonathan Sacks, the rabbi. He says a lot of us are partaking in pathological dualism, which is one side is irredeemably bad and the other side is unimpeachably good. And so it's just this us versus them mentality, and it just wedges us further and further apart. And so Scott Sauls says, the way of Jesus has a way to kind of, first of all, tick everybody off, but also unite people in a way, like churches are united by the blood of Christ. Like, it's amazing to see the kind of makeup of the diversity of the church. And so this book, Jesus Outside the Lines, he is very brave because he addresses a lot of issues. As a pastor, I deal with a lot of people asking me questions about what to do with politics, right? What do we do with abortion? What do we do with racism? What do we do with all sorts of stuff? And that's why I have a book coming out called Slogans Are Broken, because you can't just answer any of these things with a quick slogan, because really it causes more damage. It doesn't, slogans, they should serve as talking points, but they now serve as trigger points. That's the tagline of my new book. All right. So here are some of the things he talks about. Chapter 1, red state or blue state? So is the church, are we Republican or Democrat, and blah, blah, blah. Are we for the unborn or are we for the poor? Because according to politics, we're supposed to be for one, not the other. Personal faith versus institutional church, money guilt versus money greed. I love that chapter. Racially the same or racially diverse, him or her, which talks about, a lot of gender problems we have today. And then it talks about stuff outside of Christianity that we deal with. So anyway, it's such a good book. And I really enjoyed it. And I think it really gives us, first of all, helps us kind of think, what is the worldview of Jesus? One of my favorite lines he has that can be really troubling to a lot of people. He says, in many ways, when you read the Gospels, Jesus was more right than the far right. And in many ways, when you read the Gospels, he was more left than the far left, which is kind of like, what? And you think about it, and sometimes it makes you feel a little uncomfortable, but that's kind of the point. And so Jesus was not concerned with tribalism and trying to fit perfectly in anybody's box. The truth is the truth. And so, sometimes that finds it on different parts of the spectrum. And I think we're really blind when we think only one side has the answer to all truth. Only Jesus does. So Jesus Outside the Lines, if you're struggling with your own faith, trying to figure out how do I really deal with this, read that book. Okay, so that's the first one. Can you recommend a book on starting a new ministry? Yes, I can. I think that's kind of what's along with this book. This book is called, this is the number 9 book. This isn't in order, but this is... I'm doing top 10. Number 9 is The Honest Guide to Church Planting. And there are so many helpful thoughts. This is the book I wish I read before I started my church, which is 5 years ago in 10 days. And so I thought this was such a fantastic read. One of my favorite thoughts that I got from this book, there's a lot of them. One of my favorite thoughts is he talked about when God gives you a vision. He gives it to people who are arrogant enough to go out and do it. Like as a church plant, guys, I was 23 years old and I planted a church. How dumb could I have been? But I believed it. I believed I can do it. I believed I could kill it. And so God has this way of calling those kind of people. Of course, there's faithfulness and love. They have to be great Christians, but there's still a bit of arrogance there. And God graciously still uses us. And then he spends a lot of his time humiliating us. And so he actually says that vision oftentimes is a bait and switch, where God gives us this beautiful vision just to get us started. And then he humbles us and just defeats us and kills the ego for the next 5 to 10 years. And we wind up having a vision that's so much more compelling to the kingdom of God, but doesn't look anything like the vision God originally gave us when we started our church plant. That was encouraging to me because the vision of what my church was going to be when I started versus now is dramatically different. And I would have been upset to think that I was going to change my vision. But it's exactly what God needed to do to get me to step out and do it. And then he's humbled me every step of the way. So it's such a good book. I think it's really helpful because it's like, hey guys, your church plant's probably not going to be amazing. Like it's probably not going to be on the top 100 growth list. Nobody's going to ever know your name. But guess what? There is beauty in being faithful to the gospel, and people are fun. Like people are like, they're not fun, but they are fun. Like it's such a privilege to pastor. And I think that book was a reminder for me. It is a privilege to pastor my people, and they minister to me just as much as I minister to them. So I think it's a really good wake-up call. If you are considering church planting, you have to read that book first. This next book is fascinating. This is number 8, okay? So I think the rest of these are less ministry related. So if you're not a minister here, don't worry. The rest of these are just Christian in general. And so I think it'll be really good. Here's the next one. Live Not by Lies, a Manual for Christian Dissidents by Rod Dreher. I think it's Dreher. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. This book rocked me. I just finished this book, and I don't know if you guys, I don't know how this makes you feel, but I do. What do you call that? Earmark? Or what do you, what I do here is, hey, I can quote this in a sermon, or I can quote this in a book in the future, or whatever. It's almost like every chapter I have a bunch of these earmarks. And I think it's really helpful. It's a very, very helpful book because what it does is it looks at our history and actually looks at Russia and communism and how Russia gave in and how communism took over, and how some Christians, not all Christians, a lot of them didn't, but how some Christians stood for the truth no matter the persecution. So it's a fascinating read to look at how we need to be careful. So I am not a conspiracy theory guy. I am not the world is falling down guy. I'm also not hey, the future is so bright, everything's going to be perfect, just hold on. I think that's called the myth of progress. I think we very much have fallen into that myth. In fact, I think Rod Dreher talks about that in his book. Just because it's now 2021 doesn't mean it's going to be any better, right? And so I think we kind of have that myth, especially within America. Like, we're just only going to get better. Eventually we will, when the kingdom comes back in its fruition. But there's no promise that we'll keep going up. Anyways, it talks about in this book just how we need to be careful. Like, it even talked about giving up privacy and how wise is that to give, to have an Amazon in every single, Alexa in every single room and all those sorts of things. So it's a little bit like, I think if you have a level head, it's very good wisdom. I think if you don't, you see this book and just really freak out. But something that I was most convicted about in this book, he prepares you, or tries to warn us and prepare us for a future when we actually are persecuted as Christians. I don't think we are right now. And I think we cry wolf too often with that. We should actually listen to people throughout the world who are actually persecuted. And I think we change our tone. But it talked about how even as parents, as pastors, as leaders of any sort, we need to prepare our people and our own hearts that we're going to be willing to stand for truth no matter what. And so it talks about these stories of these people in the 70s who stood up against communism and the 80s and all that. It's a fascinating read, and it just talks about how Christ was all that they needed. And so it's really warning signs about where our culture is headed, but also we can know that by looking at our past. And it mentions so many other things like really a lot of times totalitarianism. He says so it's hard this is me failing in a book review. Hard totalitarianism was of the 1900s, bombs and blowing people up and all that stuff. Today, he says our biggest fear is soft totalitarianism. So it's our words, right? It's all these social media. We're going to get banned. And so he just talks about really the perversion of words, and it's really scary when we begin to be afraid to talk, and when words are now completely changed of its meaning. Whenever that happens, it leads to a lot of bad things, and I think a lot of words we have today in the Christian faith have now been seen as a negative light, and then a lot of things that Orthodox Christianity has been against since its conception is now seen in a positive light, and so we really miss the marketing war, we're losing in that. It's a fascinating read. Hope you guys are still with me. Fantastic. Read that book. It's eye-opening. Not as eye-opening as the next book. If you are a nerd, this might be my favorite book of the year. It's not as spiritual though. Like it wasn't as stirring for the affections, but it was amazing. This is called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl R. Trueman. This is, I don't know, kind of a thick read. There were so many sermon illustrations in this book. I thought it was fantastic. But what this one does, it really addresses how in the world did we get to our worldviews that we have today. And so he traces back the last 500 years and analyzes philosophers and thinkers and poets and really shows like these people, they kind of planted these seeds to the moment that we're in now. Kind of the whole agenda was like, how are we even to the point now where transgenderism is like, okay, like that's not even like an art, it's getting to that point. And there's many other things, but that was one of the key points here. Like, okay, how do we get here? Because even like 20 years ago, that would have been insane. So how do we get there so fast? And so he looks at history. So he looks at people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Nietzsche, Marx, Darwin. It's a fascinating read. And so I felt really smart after reading it because I just feel like it was so eye-opening to see what the culture, Freud has just done so much to us. How we are such an over-sexualized culture, and he points to like Sigmund Freud for doing that. And it's just really helpful because I think when we look back at our history, I think it really helps inform our future. So this is how we got to this thought. Okay, now we need to really creatively and critically think through how do we bring the gospel to this kind of culture that we're in today. Really good read. You feel really smart. I told some of my best friends, read this. I'm going to do a podcast review about it because I know I missed a ton. I couldn't put the book down. Caleb Martinez, my associate pastor, he was like, no, I'm going through it slow, but it was so good. I couldn't go through it slow. I simply couldn't. So it talks a lot about victimization. It talks a lot about, do we blame everything on society? Do we blame anything on society? It talks a lot about our view of sex and how it's our identity now. It's just so good. So good. So helpful. Now, the next book. Most people are saying this was the book of the year. Most pastors I've listened to, they say it's the best. I loved it. I may have been in a weird time in my life. I don't remember when it was 2020. So yes, it was a weird time in my life. But a lot of people are saying it was like the best. This is the book of the century. It's called Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortlund. Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortlund. The Heart of Christ for Sinners and Sufferers. And what I loved about this book, that I have loved about a lot of the books that I've been reading the past couple years, I've been really jumping into the contemplative side of Christianity, a lot of kind of Quakers too, and just different thought leaders that they don't necessarily fit my Baptist world, that I grew up in. And so I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for my Baptist world, by the way. But this book is kind of like bridging those two gaps together. After you're done reading this book, you're like, wow, God really, really loves me. Like God delights in me. It's such a cool thing. Like I so encourage you. At the end of the day, our chief goal is to just know how much God loves us. Because when we know he loves us, that is when we begin to love him and love others more. And so it is just amazing, his chapter on how he sympathizes with us, how he'll never cast us out, how he's our advocate, how he's a tender friend, he's a father of mercies. It is a great theological work, but it's also it is just so good. I'm going to see if I can see a quote that was good. Christ was sent not to mend wounded people, or wake sleepy people, or advise confused people, or inspire bored people, or spur on lazy people, or educate ignorant people, but to raise dead people. I thought that was so good. So good. Okay, so Corbin, Richard Foster, I believe he's a Quaker. That's one of them I can think on top of my head. This was a fantastic read. Honestly, I think for my church, and I know there's a few of you watching from my church, you should read this one. It's a shorter read. Go through it. Maybe take all year to go through it. It'll bless your soul. It's such a beautiful reminder of the gospel, and I think we need that reminder. We can never graduate from the love of God. This book list over here is getting big as this is going low. Let me get a drink real quick, and we'll continue. All right, so, oh gosh, I almost spilt it. It almost happened. So that's book number what? That was 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. That was 5. Here's the next one. Christian Theology by Dr. Christopher Morgan. Christian Theology by Dr. Christopher Morgan. I love systematic theology. So I read Wayne Grudem's, and I also read Millard Erickson's. To me, this is the most reachable book for the church member. Not to say it's not as brilliant, but it's more concise, and that's why I love it. Full disclosure, this man was my mentor for 4 years. I guess I can still kind of consider him my mentor now, but I only call him like once every 3 months. But anyways, Christian Theology, if you are interested in all things of theology, this is why I've loved Dr. Morgan since forever, is he is the most brilliant man you'll ever meet. He will quote footnotes. Like, he will think in his head. He has such a visual memory. He'll be like, I think it was on page 206, footnote number 11 on the bottom right corner, and then quote it. Like, this man is insane. He would read, it's his book, but he would read something like this in one day, easy, like 1 hour. It's crazy. This book is fantastic. It's a heart for the gospel, but it's such a good, balanced view of the different theologies that we have, and it's just good. That's it. It's great. Read it. Read it. Christian Theology. He was talking to me how he was bummed it came out during quarantine because it wasn't as good of like I don't know. They kind of thought that he would sell more of it, and I was like, yeah, it's just been a weird year, and so I think it should be a bestseller. It's incredible. All right, there's a good one on leadership. Family Systems and Congregational Life, A Map for Ministry by R. Robert Creech. So I guess I lied. This is one more thing on ministry. The rest are not. But this is such a good book. So this has been the most helpful book for me in leading when it comes to all things 2020. What I think we don't recognize is what we're dealing with is an anxious society. And there's so many signs of that. And so if you've been around my world for any length of time, you've probably heard me quote Edward Friedman in the past. Well, this book helps kind of take Edward Friedman's thoughts, and even more than that, Murray Bowen created this whole family systems theory. And this is like, great, there's this thing called family systems theory out there. Here's how you apply it to a congregation. And so it's just a fascinating read to learn about, hey, the problem is usually not the problem. Like, you look at the surface level issue, even within your own family life, and a lot of us, our heads just keep spinning, and it just like, it never fixes the problem because we keep fixing the surface level issues. This helps you think through, okay, what is the root issue here? This helps you recognize the greatest way you can influence be a great leader is to be the calmest person in the room. How do you do that? What are the questions you're supposed to ask? What do you do, right, when somebody's trying to like divide the church? What do you do when you're in a hospital bed and the man is dying next to you? Like, it's really good stuff. How to lead without anxiety, how to identify the root issues, and how to really minister to people and honestly minister to yourself. So I loved it. It was a brand new way to look at ministry for me. I used to just think it's just a bunch of, I don't know, like John Maxwell type leadership, which I love. It's just like 25 ways to lead, but this is like a different systematic way to look at leadership. And it was a huge blessing to me. In fact, I will reread this one in 2021 because anxiety is only grown since I read that book. Next book is quite theological, but a short read, Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves. I very much enjoyed this book. If you want to know more about the Trinity, but in a way that it stirs your affection and you love Jesus more at the end of it, please read Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves. He takes these very, very tough concepts and makes them understandable and honestly makes them devotional. He really explains why it is so critical that we have a triune God, how it's honestly the best thing for you and for me. And so I think it's really, really helpful. I have a fun time. My barber, he's a modalist. He doesn't believe in the Trinity. And so we have a fun time kind of going back and forth. And so he joked with me today. He's like, you named your last daughter Trinity just so you can keep bringing it up, huh? And I was like, that's exactly right. And even though it's not, but it's really fun. But this is a very good read. So a lot of different religions. This is where we're different because we believe in the Trinity. It's a huge difference. This is a hill to die on, right? Trinity is essential. So we have to know how to defend it. And we have to know it in a way that it's really life-giving to us. So Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves. I got two more. You guys still with me? Good. We still got viewers. Just two more. All right. This one is called Streams of Living Water by Richard Foster. Here's something I'm bothered about in culture today. In Christian culture, we are divisive almost for no reason. We divide over the dumbest things. Like, we find ways to say, oh, I'm not part of those people. I don't like that, blah, 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 okay? And so we quickly, like in the YouTube world, it's ugly, right? Like, oh, there's these corners of the YouTube Christian world where it's like, okay, we're reformed. We don't like you over there. I don't like you over there. All that stuff. This book was fantastic because it identifies the 6 different streams of Christianity. And so different, how would I describe the different streams? Essentially, I guess streams is the best word image of it. But here's the 6 different kind of tribes, different worlds of thought, kind of a lot of denominations, they find themselves in one of these streams. The contemplative tradition, which is all about prayer and think monk-like stuff, So, Baptists, we're not really known for being contemplative. We're known for being out there. We're here for the Great Commission. But the contemplative life, authors like Richard Foster have been so life-giving for me to learn about how to be silent before the Lord. I've never really learned that before my whole life. What does it mean to be silent before God? This book addresses that. So what's really neat is, here, I'll share with you the 6. So it's contemplative tradition, the holiness tradition, which is good. I think that one gets a lot of flack these days, but we need to be holy, guys. And so they make a big deal about our bodies and what we do with them, which is a good thing. But it's just called legalist, and I think it can be because it can be wrong. That's why we need all the other streams to kind of balance each other out. Charismatic tradition. I have so many charismatic brothers and sisters, but that's not my natural one. So it's really fun to learn about that one. The 4th one is the social justice tradition. And so this one, when it's understood in the proper context, there's some great stuff that they've done for the community, for the world. And so to learn from them is very, very helpful. The evangelical traditions, number 5, which is probably what I would be grown up in, kind of being a Southern Baptist. We're all about conversion experience, right? We're all about revivals, bringing more people in. It's about salvation. And then the 6th one is the incarnational tradition, which is the sacraments. So that one gets a lot of flack too, right? A lot of people today, I'm not about tradition. No, I don't do any of the sacraments. Why? What's the point of a sacramental life? Well, this kind of talks about it. So what's really helpful with this is what it does is it looks at the history. It kind of traces back since Jesus, and it talks about, here's how Jesus kind of lived this contemplative life, this holiness life, this, evangelical life, right? And then it looks at different leaders throughout history and kind of does a mini biography of them. And it's just a fascinating read. So it's fun. So it's a little bit of a history book along with, kind of an understanding of the Gospels. And then also here's the warning signs. If you are just a social justice gospel guy, here's where you get things a lot wrong. But if you are that, here's where they get a lot of things right that we can learn from them. And so what I'm striving to do, and I'm striving to do for my church this summer, we're going to do a workshop on the holistic Christian life. And we're going to look at each of these 6 different streams. How can we learn from them? How can we adapt and adopt those kind of practices into our own life? We are very naive if we believe only our way is the best way and the only way. I know there was a time in my life where I thought the Baptists were the only one in heaven, and if not, they would at least be on the front row. And then you learn, oh, wait, there's a bunch of other Christians out there, especially throughout church history, and there's all sorts of stuff. There's got to be other people there. It's encouraging. And so it's a really good book to learn your history and to be thankful that not everybody's like my tradition, and we could all learn from each other. It's very, very helpful. And then my last book, and I'll answer your guys' comments, is The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis. This was my most devotional read. Look, I don't typically highlight that much, but I highlighted the snot out of this one, okay? So whenever I put Q on the side, it literally means, quote, that is deserving of a sermon. So this was a really, really good book because it really helped me honestly just rely on Jesus. And we all did. This was a year of suffering for my family and for a lot of us, right? And this book really, I would say, kept my heart from growing cynical, kept my heart from growing cold. I really felt ministered to by God by reading this book. So I'm glad that this one's last, actually, because it was really good. it was a good reminder of why I'm here. It's a good reminder that the enemy is real, and here's ways that he's attacking. It's a good reminder that Jesus is our Savior. He's our teacher. He's our friend. He's our Lord, and just the different ways Jesus ministers to us. And so it was a good book, and it was written a long time ago, and they say it's like one of the best-selling Christian books of all time. So I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So that's my top 10, I think. I will make a 21 books to read in 2021. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure you hit subscribe.